I think the problem is that does capitalism, is it the best system? And I say, as it stands, surely not. And then people say, yeah, but what's the alternative? Central planning, we know that doesn't work. And yet, in some sense, for example, in a wartime situation, we were all surprised at how well central planning worked. So you may remember that many people who were passionately libertarians after the war were interested in planning and so forth. And economists as a whole were often influenced by that. De Breuer, probably one of the purest economic theorists, was strongly influenced by the planning of the French economy during the Second World War, so forth. So the alternative is more state intervention or state control of certain things. That's one alternative. There are many other alternatives, cooperative ventures of various sorts, and actually involving people in the systems in which they work, getting the people who do the work to have some say in the decisions. But as it stands, the system won't survive if it tries to keep getting back to normal, because normal had become abnormal, and a normal left too many people out of the game. And so I think that the answer to this question is that, in fact, capitalism may survive in some form or other, but it's surely not going to be the form that it's got to now. And as it is, we're not dealing with the problem of everybody. What you notice is Angus Deaton, another Nobel Prize winner, wrote a book called The Great Escape, where he said, you know, one of the wonderful things is that many, many people got out of poverty. But that's true globally. But unfortunately, locally, in a whole lot of countries, those who didn't get out of poverty and are in bad shape and are very vulnerable are still there. And we haven't done enough about that. And people are migrating in part because of changes in the environment which we have generated, but also in part because of wars and other things. And we're trying to interfere with that migration because people say it threatens us. So the whole system is not taking care of all the troubles that it produces. And that's because we see it too much as an economic system. We're worried about, should we impose tariffs or not? And the war between the United States and China. All of this is very destructive in some sense, because it tries to boil the problem down to sort of technical questions. Are tariffs a bad thing or a good thing? But our vulnerability under the current system has become really apparent. And I give you two examples. First of all, think about antibiotics. If we are to believe Sanofi, they're one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in France, there's only one antibiotic that's produced in France. All the rest come from essentially India and China. So antibiotics are very important. You know, now we're worried about a virus, but we should also be worried about bacteria. And the bacteria becoming more and more resistant to antibiotics. And yet all those antibiotics are being produced in countries over which we have very little control. And that's normal. But we should think about a system which pushes us into a situation in which we become extremely vulnerable like that. And so I think that's the first example, this offshoring, constant offshoring of everything leads you to be very vulnerable to a small break in the supply chains. Then we have many examples, other examples of that. And a number of supply chains broke down. And so if you go to the supermarket, you notice that certain things are missing. And those things are missing because that particular part of the chain had one or two little producers who have either disappeared or got into difficulty. And as soon as that happened, then people felt the shock, but the shock really wasn't that important. For the moment, we sort of got by with the thinking, well, we're getting back to normal. But I think we're not getting back to normal, and our vulnerability has been revealed by this sort of pandemic. And the second observation about that is, think about countries like Germany, where they handled the pandemic much better than, for example, the United States. But every now and then you have an upsurge in cases of COVID. What happened? Who were the people who were producing that in Germany? They were immigrant workers living in poor conditions, crowded conditions, not able to do social distancing and so forth. And they produced the hotspots which started the epidemic. So in other words, within our society, the way it organized itself, instead of organizing itself into a wonderful situation which was good for everybody, it's organized itself into a situation where some people are living in conditions which, unfortunately, are the conditions that generate the conditions for spreading a disease, for example. But that's our fault. I mean, we knew that. We know that those people were there, but they were hidden. You know, this wonderful film, Parasite, the Korean film, in which you have the wealthy family, and then you have the poor family trying to get into the wealthy situation. And having those people there, having those people in those bad conditions is something which our system has produced and which we should not actually tolerate. If we want to have immigrant workers who are producing the sort of goods that we need, then we should also treat the immigrant workers right and not think that, well, we don't see them very much, so we don't really want to know about that. We have to know about that, and we have to take care of everybody, not just those people who are benefiting from what the other people produce.